And welcome to my presentation on my dissertation defense titled Spiritual and Identity Development of Armenian-American College Graduates in the Northeast of Phenomenology. Today, I will review the following aspects of my study: statement of the problem, purpose of the study, research question, importance of the study, literature review, methodology, discussion of findings, implications for practice, and conclude with recommendations for future research. The problem I address in my dissertation is that Armenian Americans have been lumped into the category of white, which has not allowed space to provide students with the support services they may actually need on our college campuses. Additionally, limited studies have been conducted on the Armenian American college student population, none of which are focused on the Northeast. There is also a lack of research on the impact of involvement in an Armenian Student Association and one's spiritual or faith development. Majority of the available studies are rooted in a psychological perspective, with limited research founded in student development theory. The purpose of this phenomenological qualitative study was to explore how involvement in an Armenian Student Association at a four-year college or university supports the identity development, including spiritual and faith development, and community involvement of Armenian American college graduates in the northeastern region of the United States. In this study, I explored gaps in student support for this population of students, which may benefit students from other cultural minority groups who may go unserviced on our college campuses, and recommended inclusive practices for student affairs professionals. Which brings me to my research question and sub-questions. What is the impact of being involved in an Armenian Student Association at a four-year college or university in the Northeast on one's spiritual or faith development? How does involvement in an Armenian Student Association support the identity development of Armenian American college graduates in the Northeast in relation to their faith or spiritual development? And how does involvement in an Armenian Student Association impact the community involvement of Armenian American college graduates in the Northeast? This study adds to the research on Armenian American college student experience in the Northeast. This study addresses gaps in student support for this population of students and may benefit other student populations as well. The results will also support students' spiritual development when overall church attendance is on the decline. I will now move into a brief overview of my literature review. Armenians take great pride in the establishment of Christianity as their state religion, and Armenia was the first country to adopt Christianity as its official religion in 301 AD, following the conversion of King Teta III by St. Gregory the Illuminator. Researchers argue that the church is the cornerstone of Armenian identity. Bakalia in 1993 argues that the lines between peoplehood nationalism and the Armenian church are blurred. This explains why atheists, agnostics, and anti-clericals attend divine liturgy, often several times a year, not only for weddings, baptisms, funerals, requiems, but also for April 24 and possibly Vartanants. While church attendance in the Armenian American community may be on the decline, researchers argue that the church has also positioned itself as essential to Armenian identity, and one does not seem to exist without the other. However, the most recent edition of the Armenian Diaspora Survey conducted in 2022, which covers the United States and Ontario, Canada, shows a shift in beliefs and attitudes towards the importance of religion in relation to Armenian identity. Question 2 asks participants, in which ways do you define your Armenian identity? The top three reasons for those living in the United States were family at 84%, Armenian culture, such as dance, music, literature, etc., at 66%, and Armenian language at 65%, with 0% of respondents answering with religion or faith. However, 43% of participants responded with Christian heritage and beliefs. These results conflict with earlier arguments of the importance of religion in connection with Armenian identity. The most defining element of present-day Armenian identity is the Armenian genocide, perpetrated by the Turkish government during the early 1900s. Large-scale massacres began in the 1890s under the direction of Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid and culminated in the genocide of 1915, where the new government of the Young Turks orchestrated the mass slaughter of 1.5 million Armenians. Part of what keeps the genocide alive for most Armenians is the continued denial by the Turkish government. Armenians globally take the time to remember the horrific events of 1915 each year on April 24, Armenian Martyrs' Day. The United States only recently recognized the Armenian genocide under the Biden administration in a White House statement on April 24, 2021. Nagorno-Karabakh, known to Armenians as Artsakh, became an autonomous region within Azerbaijan under the Soviet Union. In 1988, Artsakh declared its intention to join Armenia, triggering the First Karabakh War, which lasted until 1994 and resulted in over 30,000 deaths, with Armenian forces gaining control of the region. After years of sporadic conflict, the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War broke out in 2020, with Azerbaijan and Turkey launching an attack on the capital region of Stepanakert, targeting civilians and cultural landmarks. The war ended in a ceasefire brokered by Russia, allowing Azerbaijan to retain the territories it had gained. Despite the ceasefire, tensions remained, leading to the Third Nagorno-Karabakh War in September 2023, when Azerbaijan launched a swift offensive into Stepanakert, forcing the remaining Armenians to relinquish control of the region. For many, these recent wars trigger memories of the Armenian genocide. Vardanyan 2021 argues that the war was a turning point in modern Armenian history. Outcomes of the war for the Armenian people included moral depression, economic downturn, territorial losses, and on top of these, the thousands of lives, mainly young military servicemen. A point of contention is that Armenians are classified as white ethnically, but are still subjected to discrimination in the United States. As a result of the Naturalization Act of 1790, which limited American citizenship to free white persons, Armenians were involved in two court cases in the early 1900s to prove their whiteness. This was because, by being able to classify as white in the United States, Armenians would have access to citizenship and permanently ensure their safety from ethnic discrimination and genocide they had faced in the Ottoman Empire. In the first case in 1909, Jacob Halajian, Mugurdic Ekmejian, Avak Muradian, and Bazar Bayans had petitioned for citizenship in Massachusetts and won. At this time, whiteness was determined by vital scrutiny, meaning an individual had to appear in court to ensure that one's skin tone was the proper shade of white. To Judge Lowell, the petitioners looked like Europeans and rejected bodily appearance as a sign of racial identity. Thus, while whiteness was conferred upon Armenian Americans, it came with the assumption of their Anglo conformity. In 1923 in Oregon, Tatos Kartosian applied for citizenship after appearing in court and received provisional approval. Soon after, the Attorney General's office filed a suit to revoke his certificate of naturalization, alleging that Kartosian was not a free white person. In the resulting 1925 case of United States versus Kartosian, it was concluded that Armenians would not corrupt the blood of the European race and could be counted upon to blend in, to melt into the pot. As a result, Armenians today are able to racially categorize themselves as being white. There are four theoretical frameworks in which I framed my interview protocol. In Assen's theory of student involvement is seen as student-motivated behavior. Dr. Assen argues that every institutional policy and practice affects the way students spend their time and the amount of energy they devote to their studies. Fowler found that faith takes the form of unconscious structures that constitute a series of stages of faith development. Fowler also clarified that movement through stages is more like a spiral than a step-by-step advancement. Park's theory of faith development states that young adulthood is a time when a person begins to self-consciously reflect on life's meaning. Parks also highlighted the responsibility of higher education as a whole to create communities in which students feel welcomed and safe while being provided with experiences that will encourage them to explore and address conscious conflicts, have opportunities for pause, and be supported as they clarify, confirm, and test their new images. And lastly, in Finney's ethnic identity development theory, ethnic identity constructs focus on what people learn about their culture from family and community, passed down from one generation to the next. Ethnic identity develops from sharing culture, religion, geography, and language with individuals who are connected by strong loyalty and kinship. Theories of ethnic identity formation examine how students understand the implications of their ethnicity and make decisions about its role in their lives, regardless of the extent of their ethnic involvement. I would like to now highlight some of the limited research on Armenian-American college students. In her dissertation, Ekimian 2008 looks at the factors that influence identity development of Armenian-American college students in California. Ekimian discusses the importance of student-faculty relationships in the assimilation, transition, and retention of first-generation Armenian-American college students. She also discusses the importance of not pigeonholing this group of students into the white category, as this population has their own language, traditions, alphabet, and country. Seropian 2014 studied how the Armenian-American identity influences the experience of college students. Participants in Seropian's study discussed the lack of Armenian representation within the administration and found the inability to relate to faculty and staff as debilitating. She also found that students navigate their college experience through code switching between cultural identities, and when able to unite the two, found more opportunities to be engaged on campus. And in their thesis, Nersesian 2017 explored the perception of Armenian-American college students of their campus climate. The researcher argues that classifying this population of students as white has led to a lack of data on their educational experiences and outcomes. The findings demonstrated that these students constantly negotiate between their Armenian ethnic identity and American student identity while finding ways to connect to their campus environment. Narcisian 2017 discusses the importance of being involved in a cultural student organization on campus, which allows for students to celebrate their culture while sharing it with the larger campus community. I will now transition into the methodology for my study. In recruiting participants for my study, upon institutional review board approval, I posted an initial Google Forms recruitment questionnaire in Facebook groups, such as the New York Armenian groups. I also reached out to the local ASA chapters via email and Instagram direct message, asking them to post my recruitment information. I also reached out to the local churches who circulated the recruitment materials in their weekly newsletters. Lastly, I reached out to the local Armenian organizations, asking them to post my recruitment materials. I also posted on my own personal social media platforms and asked friends and family to spread the word. As I received responses to the recruitment survey, I reached out to individuals to schedule one-on-one interviews via Zoom. I also asked participants to recommend additional parties to participate in my study via snowball sampling. Going into my proposal presentation last April, my initial intent was to focus on individuals who had graduated from a four-year college or university in New York City, such as Baruch, Columbia, or NYU, in the last 5 years and still lived in the tri-state area. Upon conferring with my committee, we decided to broaden the area to New Jersey as well to include Rutgers University, as they are also known for having a large ASA. As I began my recruitment efforts, I did not receive any responses from those who graduated from my originally intended colleges and universities, and did not receive responses back to my initial email requests or Instagram direct messages. My original efforts at recruitment yielded individuals who were both involved and not involved in their ASA, and graduates of colleges and universities outside of my target geographical location. After 3 weeks of recruitment, I consulted with my mentor about expanding my recruitment criteria to also include individuals who are not involved in or did not have an ASA at their alma mater, and to expand my location range to the general Northeast region, focusing on colleges and universities located north of Pennsylvania and south of Massachusetts. This expansion opened up the number of eligible individuals who had completed my recruitment questionnaire. Through study recruitment, 14 individuals completed the recruitment survey, which determined eligibility for the study, as well as consent to be contacted for an interview. Of those 14, 2 were not eligible for participation due to their graduation years falling outside of the intended 2019 to 2024 graduation years, and 1 individual did not want to be contacted for an interview. My final participant yield resulted in 11 participants who were recruited through purposeful sampling and snowball sampling. Of the 11 participants, 3 identified as male and 8 identified as female. 9 of the participants were involved in the ASA at their alma mater, while the remaining 2 did not have an ASA available to them at their alma mater, but 10 of the 11 participants were involved in campus in some capacity. 2 researcher-designed instruments were used for data collection. First, each participant completed a demographic questionnaire which also ensured participant eligibility. The second instrument was interview protocol, which was a list of semi-structured, open-ended questions developed for this study. The protocol questions were grounded in theoretical framework and the literature review, and were designed to address the primary research question and sub-questions. Prior to collecting data, I conducted 1 pilot interview with an individual who I considered to be a key informant. I recorded the session and asked them for feedback on the session recordings and for suggestions on the questions asked as part of my interview protocol. I then incorporated the feedback given into my remaining interviews with research participants. Data was collected through the form of one-on-one interviews and through document review. After I received consent to conduct the interview via email, I scheduled up a mutually convenient time to meet with participants via Zoom and emailed them the informed consent form that outlined their rights to withdrawal, confidentiality, and potential risks and benefits of participation. At the start of our session, I also reiterated the informed consent form and asked them if they had any questions regarding their participation in the study. After answering any questions they may have had, I began the one-on-one interview via the protocol, which was recorded via Zoom recording. In addition to these interviews, I reviewed pertinent documents for my research. I reviewed social media posts on Instagram to gain an understanding of outreach and interaction with the Armenian-American community on these college campuses. I also researched articles that may have been written in college newspapers about the Armenian-American community on and off campus. This allowed me to gain an understanding of how these colleges and universities portray the experiences of this population of students on their campus, and how these campuses are viewed by stakeholders outside of the college. To prepare the data, all interviews were transcribed via Zoom transcription, after which I reviewed each transcription for errors and conducted my analysis through manually coding the data. In line with the phenomenological methodological approach, I reviewed each transcript and highlighted significant statements or sentences related to the lived experience of each participant via horizontalization. I then developed clusters of meaning from these statements into emerging themes. Once I appropriately clustered the data, I developed textual and structural descriptions wherein I discussed what the participants have experienced and in what context. Saturation was achieved when no new information was needed to add to an understanding of each theme. I will now move into the final section of my presentation, which includes the discussion of my findings, implications for practice, and recommendations for future research. The discussion of my findings in the context of the research question and sub-questions are analyzed through the following themes: the role of one's family on their college experience, Armenian faith and spirituality, Armenian-American identity, involvement on campus, and then the ASA, community involvement, and existing literature. The first theme that emerged was the role of family on one's college experience. Berry, 1992, their model of acculturation postulates that immigrants face two important issues: maintaining their ethnic distinctiveness in the new society and adopting the new society's values. Gazarian et al. 2008 found that a moderate level of familism produced the most optimal outcome, and that levels of familism above moderate did not produce more positive academic outcomes. Participants in their interviews shared how their families serve as their foundation in many areas of their lives, which also aligns with the results of 2022 Armenian Diaspora Survey, wherein 86% of respondents in the Northeast cited family as one of the ways in which they define their Armenian-American identity. Participants also noted that the role of their families in their decisions on college, major, and career choice, and all participants shared how they had no choice but to go to college upon graduating high school. Vartanian 2018 found that Armenian-American college students feel a strong sense of family obligation, such as meeting parents' expectations and wishes. Those who had dreams of arts-based degrees were swayed into pursuing STEM-based degrees instead, and one participant noted how their mother did their own research and found the program they eventually enrolled in. The second emerging theme was Armenian faith and spirituality. Researchers argue that the Armenian Church is seen as a cornerstone of Armenian identity. However, according to the results of the Armenian Diaspora Survey in 2022, 0% of participants responded as a religion or faith being one of their defining characteristics of their Armenian identity. Bakalian 1993 also argued that one's faith is so central to their Armenian American identity that those who identify as atheists will still attend church services. Throughout their interviews, 8 out of 11 participants stated at different points in their interviews how Armenia is the first nation to adopt Christianity, and this pride in Armenia being the first nation to formally adopt Christianity as a state religion is a theme that arose within my literature review. One of the participants who identified as atheist also shared how they would still identify as Christian if they were asked about their faith background, even though they do not believe in God, just because of how rooted Armenian American identity is in religion, which is in alignment with Bakalian 1993. Participants were also mixed in their feelings of connection to the Armenian Church, and not all participants viewed their faith as central to the Armenian American identity. Fowler argued that faith takes the form of unconscious structures that constitute a series of stages of faith development, and that movement through the stages is more like a spiral than a step-by-step advancement. In their interviews, participants noted how they grew up with a set of standards that was In their interviews, participants noted how they grew up with a set of beliefs that was influenced by their families, and that as they have gotten older, they have either drifted away from those beliefs or have a renewed sense of appreciation for those beliefs. One participant also shared how her faith practices were her foundation in college as she was a STEM major, which is in line with White II 2021, who argued that students often face challenges to their spiritual growth simultaneously to challenges for academic and emotional health. White II also discussed the importance of mentors in relation to spiritual formation in the Christian college environment. However, none of the participants mentioned the role of a staff or faculty mentor in their spiritual formation in college and had limited interactions with Armenian American faculty and staff members on campus. UN 2024 explored the role of acculturation and inculturation on thriving among Asian American college students. Research shows that when Asian American students are able to share their spirituality with others from their own ethnic culture or similar Asian groups, it creates space for developing a sense of belonging and promoting community on campus. This was evident for one participant who helped organize a vigil after the Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2023. sharing how they had never seen anything like that executed on a college campus before, and how it was an opportunity to educate their peers on current events. While the majority of participants did not feel like their involvement in their ASA contributed to the evolution of their faith and spiritual practices, Krikor shared how he felt that the ASA was the closest thing to an Armenian church, and Anna he felt that she could go to any one of her peers for help with spiritual matters. This is also in alignment with Serapion 2014, as her research found that participants would turn to peers who shared similar experiences and that they would turn to Armenian networks on campus to navigate structures on campus. The third overarching theme was Armenian-American identity. Through their interviews, participants shared how they feel more American than Armenian in their day-to-day lives, but bring their identity as an Armenian with them wherever they go. One participant shared how they simultaneously feel the most Armenian and most American at Armenian events, feeling the most American when non-Armenian music comes on and seeing the reactions from all of the parents. The majority of participants also shared how they feel most Armenian when at Armenian weekend events, when immersed in Armenian cultural activities, or when they are around other Armenian Americans in general, but reported feeling puzzled or having to code switch when they go back to their regular day-to-day. The notion of code switching also correlates with Seropian 2014, who found that students navigate their college experience through code switching between cultural identities, and when they are able to unite the two, they find more opportunities to be engaged on campus. Participants in my study also shared that they did not appreciate being viewed as white, simply based on the color of their skin. These sentiments correlate to the findings in their CSAN study, wherein students shared feelings of exclusion and marginalization, and that while they felt like a minority on campus, they were not viewed as a minority because of the color of their skin. This also relates back to Bakalyan's notion of how Armenian Americans are a hidden minority. Another theme that emerged was the impact of involvement on campus and in the ASA. Participants in their CSAN study discussed how joining the ASA at their alma mater had a positive impact on their sense of belonging on campus, which aligns with Aston's theory of involvement. Their CSAN's findings demonstrated how students constantly negotiate between their Armenian ethnic identity and American identity while finding ways to connect to their campus environment. This is in line with participants' experiences of negotiating between their Armenian and American identities on and off campus, and how they would assimilate in certain environments while maintaining their Armenian identity in others. Akimian 2008 found that joining the ASA was a positive experience for students' sense of self, and that participants reported wanting to join a cultural club at school to learn more about their heritage. While participants in my research had varying experiences of impactful involvement in their ASA, no participant shared that their involvement had a negative impact on their college experience. One participant did share how their time in college helped to strengthen their Armenian American identity. Additionally, one of the students who did not have an ASA at their alma mater wished that they had one available to them, as they were interested in learning more about their Armenian culture and heritage. In addition to involvement in their ASA, some participants also chose to be involved in academic-focused student organizations, seeking professional development opportunities and advice on how to better present themselves in their respective fields of study. One participant shared how their role as ASA president gave them a leadership role within the Armenian community. These sentiments support Haynes' 2019 findings of how participants in their study remained involved in student organizations because of the opportunities available to them as a member, such as skill development, leadership roles, and interactions with peers. One theme I explored in my study that was not present in the initial literature review was the impact of involvement in an ASA on community involvement. For several participants, involvement in their ASA launched them into their current involvement within the Armenian-American community. For others, involvement in their ASA was in addition to involvement in their local Armenian church or Armenian organization. One participant who did not have an ASA at their alma mater reported feeling that they did not miss out on anything as they were already involved in the Armenian community off campus. Conversely, the second participant who did not have an ASA available to them at their alma mater at the time of their interview was still looking for ways to be involved in the community as they reported a lack of access due to their physical location. Participants were also asked about the impact of the Nagorno-Karabakh wars on their involvement within the Armenian community. The majority of participants shared how the wars heightened their involvement, with one participant also sharing how the wars served as the inspiration behind a recent trip to Armenia. In conducting my document review as part of my data collection, the majority of participants' alma mater's college or university websites did not have articles or press releases about the Armenian genocide or the recent Nagorno-Karabakh wars. The majority of participants expressed a general desire for school administrators to know their history and to acknowledge dates that are important to members of the Armenian-American community newsletters. Therefore, one implication for practice is for individuals working in higher education to have a better understanding of the Armenian-American experience, including the impact of major historical events such as the Armenian Genocide and the Nagorno-Karabakh Wars. Another implication for practice is to ensure the longevity of Armenian student associations on campus and student organizations that support students of other cultural minority groups. In their interviews, several participants shared how their ASA went inactive during the COVID-19 pandemic or had been struggling over the years in general. Student affairs professionals should work to better promote those organizations to incoming and current students to ensure that those students feel a sense of belonging on their college campuses, which could help to retain those students. An additional recommendation would be for student affairs professionals to connect those students with administrators who share their cultural background as an additional resource for students and club members, and to provide them with local resources such as local Armenian organizations and local Armenian churches. Upon completion of my study, I had several recommendations for future research, but in the interest of time, I have highlighted a few of those recommendations. One limitation of the study was the geographical region in which I conducted my study, which may not reflect the overall lived experiences of Armenian-American college students across the Northeast. Further research is needed to understand the experiences of Armenian-American college students, especially in areas of the United States where there may not be as strong of an Armenian community, and how they define their Armenian-American identity. Another recommendation for future research would be to conduct a focus group with current college students who are involved in their ASA to further triangulate the data collected in my study to see how they define their Armenian-American identity and the support services they feel like they receive from their college or university. The original intent for my study was to solely focus on Armenian-American college graduates who had been involved in the ASA at their alma mater. However, the recruitment criteria was expanded to include those who were not involved due to challenges in recruitment. The two participants who were not involved in their alma mater's ASA did not have one available to them, not because they chose not to be involved. Further research should be conducted on individuals who had an ASA available to them and why they did not participate in the ASA to delve deeper into aspects of Armenian-American identity. The majority of participants also shared their experiences in local Armenian-American organizations off campus, and so further research is needed to explore the impact of those organizations on the Armenian-American community as a whole. Lastly, further research is needed on students from cultural minority groups and their connections to spiritual and faith practices to compare the findings of those to my study. For references within this presentation as well as my dissertation, please see the references section of my dissertation. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from folks with any questions they may have.